Good evening, everyone. My name is Aaron Blanco. I am the Program Director at New York State Council on the Arts for the Special Arts Services Program, which is the program I'll be speaking to you all about tonight. And just by way of just by way of introduction, just want to say thank you to NIFA for hosting us here today on this evening, so we can talk about the Special Arts Services Program in some real in-depth detail. So we'll get started with our first slide, our next slide. Here's some of our contact information. Also, Program Director, and Kathy Barnes is with me here over behind the camera there, running our multimedia here tonight, and she'll also be helping me ably, I might add, answer a lot of questions when we get to that part of the presentation. So let's go on to our next slide. Little agenda here, give you a sort of sense of our conversation today. Welcome, check, we got that covered. Important dates coming right up on our next slide. We'll go over the SAS program introduction itself and some key program reminders, like a top 5, top 6 list. Then we'll go over the application evaluation process that we use. And then finally some application information and resource links for you to have and be mindful of to access additional information along the way. And then we're going to go in real time. We're actually going to go to our website to check out our SAS guidelines and review them. And we'll give you some context where our documents are and stuff like that. And then finally, I'll probably be pretty quick in terms of all those areas so we can get to the last part of our agenda, which is questions and answers. Okay? So here we are, our next slide, some important dates and deadlines. The portal opened February 11, 2019. If you're a direct applicant, this is, just keep in mind that the Consolidated Funding Application, CFA portal, is the portal that we'll be using this year. If you've applied in the past, we've been on the Grants Gateway application portal component. But this year we're moving on to the CFA. It's another statewide application portal. It's definitely very graphic rich, much more intuitive. I think we're very excited that you're going to have a much more friendly user experience with this application portal. Now, you're still responsible for Grants Gateway to do all your pre-qualification and also for contracting should you get a grant on the back end. So that's still in play. If you're going to be sponsored, you don't have to worry about this because your sponsoring organization will be navigating through these various portals I just mentioned. Okay? But anyway, it's February 11th, it's been live and available. The application deadline is March 28th, 2019 at 4 p.m. That's when you need to have submitted your full application with all required uploads by that time. If you're being sponsored, please keep in mind that the sponsor organization is the one that's actually doing this on your behalf, so they might actually have a deadline for all your materials. It might be earlier than that, so you want to work with them as to when your deadline is in order for them to get your application in on time. Okay, and ultimately awards, expect awards to be announced about December 15th, 2019. We kind of queue our reviewed applications in batches throughout our year, through our panel meetings, our council meetings. So some folks may actually get their announcements earlier than that, but you can expect the latest to receive an award announcement, an outcome announcement, December 15th. Keep that in mind too. A little sort of introduction for the SAS, lots of acronyms, right? CFA, SAS, Special Arts Services Program. So basically this particular program is devoted to supporting arts activities that ensure access for historically underserved communities, including African American, Caribbean, Latinx, Asian, Native American, LGBTQIA, and immigrant communities. SAS supports programs that engage the arts to address the changing needs of New York's most vulnerable populations, including people in geographically remote areas with limited cultural offerings, disabled communities, the aging, impoverished, and homeless populations, as well as court, jail, and prison-involved juveniles and adults. Okay, so the SAS program is a multidisciplinary program where we entertain programming activity from whether it's performing arts and theater, music, dance, as well as visual arts, literary arts, okay, which we have other programs that serve those specific discipline areas. The key difference is with the Special Arts Services program, there has to be an intersection between that high-quality arts and cultural programming and one or more of our defined communities. And that's a little bit of a laundry list, and when we go to the guidelines, there's a sort of more bulleted version of the laundry list as well. Okay, so start thinking about that in terms of being a successful SAS applicant and ultimately grant recipient. You're providing high-quality arts and culture activity, check, great, and that it's intersecting in some significant way with one or more of our defined communities. And then the third part of it is, and this is true of any application to SAS regardless of category, how are you reaching that community that you're looking to serve? How are you as an organization are embedding yourself and making yourself known to that community in terms of the programs you're offering to that community? So those are what I consider sort of the three sort of stools, the three legs of the stool for a successful SAS application. If it's not meeting one of those and it's more like general audience activity, then maybe if it's a theater program, they should go to the theater program. If it's a theater offering, they should go to the theater program, for example. So those are the kinds of conversation we get in a lot with our applicants or potential applicants. So that's what you want to be most clear about in terms of how your program intersects with our defined communities. In terms of categories, we offer a number of categories. Some of them are very familiar in terms of being offered throughout our different program areas at New York State Council on the Arts. General operating support. That one is reserved really for sort of organizations that have full-time programming, have at least one full-time member on staff, and I would say 85 to 90% of its overall programming activity is defined by serving our key audiences. And oftentimes for GOS grant recipients, the folks that either establish the organization and or continue to run the organization are also reflective of the same community or one of or more of our defined communities. Okay, general support, in essence, represents the most unrestricted funding an organization can get. This is not available as a sponsored request, just by way for your information. So this is only for direct applicants that you can apply to general support. Okay. Our next two categories, project support and instruction and training, are available as sponsored requests. Okay, so if you're working with a sponsor, this is where you would apply to one of these two categories. And project support entertains a variety of activities, whether it be in single discipline or multidisciplinary, that, like I said, intersects with our communities, and you will define or case make in your application how the program intersects with one of our defined communities and how you as an organization are availing yourself and ingratiating yourself within that community and with that community. Okay? Instruction and training is a kind of project support that's very specialized, and this is really to offer, it's not meant for classes for simply enrichment purposes. It's very specialized for 3 tracks, and we'll get more into that when we go over the actual categories, which include pre-professional, professional, okay, and training in the folk arts at a high level in the folk arts that serves one or more of our specific populations that we seek to serve. So oftentimes it's either focused around that community, or if it's a general sort of professional level, pre-professional level program, applicants will submit project support for scholarships that would go to members of one of our defined communities that they would articulate in the application. And so that's how that would work. If it's just art for art's sake, it may be project support if it's embedded in the community, or it might be arts education, which is a different program, if it's community-based learning. So and the requirements are a little different there. But just wanted to sort of make that distinction there. And then finally, our 4th category is regrants and partnerships, and that's by invitation only. I'm just presenting it here by way of information. For example, we're working with New York Foundation for the Arts in a partner grant to reestablish some technical assistance to our ongoing grantees, and we're currently in development in terms of realizing what that program is going to look like. It's coming out in the coming year, in this year actually. And we invited NIFA to submit an application in order to work with us in partnership to do that program. And many of our programs across the board offer some kind of partnership, re-grants, or combination of both. And again, it's invitation only. So unless you're one of those organizations that we've talked to you or spoken to you about doing this, it wouldn't apply to you. Okay? So program goals. These are the sort of general bullets to keep in mind in terms of, as you case make, what we're looking to achieve when we issue a grant. Enhance access to the arts for historically underserved communities. Bring the arts to isolated geographic areas and to communities with high rates of poverty. Design programs for people with disabilities. Offer scholarships, for example, for arts training in tuition-free or low-cost classes, serving students from historically underserved communities or with disabilities. Promote intergenerational multicultural communities, including ethnic traditions that serve their own unique and diverse populations. The more specific you are about serving one or more of our defined communities, the more successful your application is likely to be in the Special Arts Services program. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. So these are, under important reminders, things to keep in mind when applying, in some cases to any program at NISCA, but certainly for the Special Arts Services program. All grants are issued a year out on a calendar year basis. So the application you make as part of this funding cycle is for activity happening at this point between January and December of 2020. So everything you're projecting is for that year. Should you get a grant, the contract is issued for activity to cover costs with our grant dollars for activity happening in that year. So it does require a certain amount. Hit it! I love it. Wow, encore. Lovely tune, thank you. Okay, just for organizations that maybe have sort of been applied to us over the years or in the past, applicants may no longer make 2 non-exempt requests with the SAS program, i.e. you can only make 1 project or general support request to our program. So you can only make 1 request, not 2 within our program. We do have what we call a 2 request limit, and this is really for direct applicants more than anything, of non-exempt requests. And the idea behind that is you would make 1 application in 1 program, like SAS would be an example, and maybe you could make another application if it made sense to the theater program or the visual arts program, but not within the same program. And that is a change in the guidelines from previous years where it was allowed. So you really want to be mindful of sort of speaking to your best program. If you have a few things that could fit in the SAS application, sort of make a decision about which program would be the best fit. Or if you're a direct applicant and you meet our qualifications, when you have multiple activities and multiple programs within the SAS construct, general support is essentially where you go as another option. Funding for sponsored projects generally do not exceed $10,000. Just keep that in mind if you're a sponsored request as an organization that's not under your own sort of banner or applying directly like all the other many organizations that you would essentially be competing with. It's definitely meant to be a sort of a more sort of starter kind of opportunity for you. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Administrative costs for delivery services can vary depending on nature, depth, and scope of work, but rarely exceed 50% of the project cost. So when proposing any kind of support, any kind of project to us, you can certainly allocate a certain amount of funding, of expenses that our grant might cover towards overhead, direct administration, but it should be about 15%. I mean, that's really the upper limit. We like to see our grant dollars, generally speaking, going to covering direct costs like artist fees or for materials that are directly related to the program being offered. Okay? Generally speaking, and this is true actually across the board, not just with the SAS program, any program in this, SAS funding seldom covers more than 50% of the total project budget and seldom exceeds 25% of the organization's overall operational budget. So what does that mean? So in project support, we would never cover more than 50% of the cost. So if you're requesting the $25,000, you need to articulate a cash-based projected budget of at least $50,000 or more, of which we're covering up to half. Okay? The budget can be more than that, and our percentage can be less, but that's the most we tend to cover. However, if your organization, that's all they do, and your overall budget is $50,000, then we're looking at 25% of your overall budget that you wouldn't really get behind. So you want to adjust your request based on your organizational capacity in that case, in terms of budget. Okay? And applicants, just to keep in mind, again, if you're a sponsored request, your sponsoring organization will deal with this. But if you're a direct applicant, applicants no longer register requests on the NISCA website. Applicants must submit through the online NISCA New York State Consolidated Funding Application, or NISCA CFA. That's the acronym struck here at CFA. That's the current grant portal for this cycle moving forward. Application portal. Okay. Just to repeat, a few people came a little late. If you're still going to work with Grants Gateway in order to pre-qualify, and should you get a grant for contracting, just like you have the last several years or more. Okay, so that's the one. But the applications go through this new portal. Okay. All right. So this is really just a brief review of how an application gets reviewed once it's submitted. So I'll be taking questions. I'll pause for questions. Strategic. This is true across the board with some exception. NISCA program staff and peer panelists use 3 primary criteria outlined in statutory requirements to evaluate all grant applications. Every narrative question that you make a response to will have like a little sort of subheader in terms of what one of these criteria that question is seeking to address. And the 3 criteria include service to the public, artistic programmatic excellence, managerial fiscal competence. We convene peer panelists that review in person, these are in-person panels, that review each request that comes before us. They deliberate, discuss them, and then individually, they rate them on a scale of 1 to 9. 1 being the lowest, 9 being the highest. And for each of the 3 criteria. Okay, and then we create an aggregate of that those individual ratings, and that tends to inform our rubric for funding in terms of the higher you're rated, the more likely you are to get funding. We have certain criteria. If it's rated, like for example, a 3 or lower in any one of the 3 criteria, by mandate we can't fund an organization or that application for the organization. Depending on how many dollars we have for the year to spend down and how many qualified or viable applications are before us, we may fund less than the 4 requests. So typically the higher rated organizations get closer to the 4 request amount in terms of a grant. And this is among those getting grants. And the lower the organization rates might get like 80%, 75%. Okay, we do try to fund at least 50 to 60% or more of the requests, so it makes sense. You know, that you're at least getting close or near to close to what you're asking for, so you can be successful in doing the thing you're projecting to do in your application. Okay, and then finally, this is just some websites to keep in mind in terms of links to specific areas of our applications. We're going to go to this in real time, our Special Art Services Program homepage, where we have summary information. We have links to our sponsor request form, as well as our guidelines. We're going to go to them in real time and continue the conversation. And also keep in mind, on YouTube we have NISCA Public Affairs channel, that's in quotes, where we have constantly updating YouTube tutorials, how to apply, how to contract, how to get a username, all sorts of, especially if you're a direct applicant and working with our different platforms, we have all sorts of different tutorials there for you to be able to sort of make sense of specific things that you might be needing to do that you're not familiar with. And then finally, this is the direct link to the application manual, which we're going to go to. So we'll go to the next slide, and before we go to the next slide. So the next thing we're going to do it in real time. We're going to go to our website, and from our website actually navigate, Tabby will ably navigate us to these materials. Okay? And just one second. And this is just a quick laundry list of the various page numbers of in terms of what's available where in our guidelines booklet. If you remember last year's and previous years, it was like 90 pages with all the technical information. We've streamlined it to be just about the requirements and the criteria for applying to NISCA, and those other materials, those technical materials for the mechanics of applying is in a different manual altogether. So if you don't need to deal with it, this gets you to the information you need to make an assessment as to, what are the questions, what's the criteria, am I a good fit for this request or that request, in terms of category. Okay. Before we go there, I do invite you to feel free on your cell phone, if you have a tablet with internet access, you can follow along in real time with us. We're going to do it for you. But before we go there, or we can go there to the home page, any questions so far of the sort of summary material I presented? Hands are going. Okay. Young lady in green.
I'm sorry, I came in late. Are we going to have access to those slides that you were showing?
So those slides, we're recording this. So the actual PowerPoint is not being issued.
Okay.
But there'll be a video of this presentation, which includes the slides. And everything you need is going to be on the website we're going to now.
Sure.
So everything was parts of what's in the website anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Miss? I was the same. Okay. So let's go to the source. So it's arts.ny.gov. That's the NISCA website, New York State Council on the Arts website. So we're going to the home page as we speak. For those of you who have done business with us for a long time, this is a freshly reimagined website. Okay, and so Cabby went to programs in the gray banner there, clicked on it, and this is the program's overview section. And as you can see, it's basically all our standing programs are listed here: architecture, arts education, dance, electronic media, facilities, so on and so forth. And obviously, if you're looking for special art services, you click on that program there, right there. This brings us to our program homepage. And you can see proof that we actually work there. Obviously, our photos are there, as you can see. I'm glad I wear the same suit. Cabby's there. Any questions, you have her number and email address. Please funnel it right to her. She'll be much more able to answer your questions than I. No, okay. We're open for business. So, and then what she just did is from that page, she clicked on the actual guidelines link. And this is the actual PDF document. It looks like this if you printed it out. It's about 15, 17 pages, 15 pages, okay? And this goes over specific general funding restrictions, a laundry list of ineligible activities, but this is like NISCA-wide, so this is not necessarily specific to SAS. This is like sort of the general requirements, a snapshot of them anyway. A couple of key elements. I'm going to highlight a few things as we go through the manual. Out-of-state travel, especially, we do not fund that. We also don't fund equipment, okay? Usable goods, consumable goods, for example, like lighting gels or something that gets used up, that's fine. Paper, pens, markers, brushes, that's okay. But like computer, hardware, lighting equipment, anything that appreciates, we would not be able to fund it with our knowledge. It could be part of your overall budget, and other sources could be paying for that as part of the match if that's something you need for the project. But our funds, should you get a grant, would not go towards those specific expenses. And the two big ones is out-of-state travel, especially, and equipment purchase. So technically, people ask why sometimes. If you bought it with our state funds, the state would own it, and we would have to house it and keep it. And we don't want to do that. We don't have enough storage room. So you can rent equipment, and that's fine to use our funds to rent equipment. That's certainly acceptable use of funds. Okay. And again, this is the laundry list is here. You can make yourself familiar with that when you review the guidelines on your own. Special art services. This is the program overview, and here in the center here with the sort of square bullets, this is sort of it's not a fully exhaustive list, but it's a pretty all-encompassing list of what we call our defined communities, right? We spoke about that. I spoke about that at the top of the presentation. And again, a few people relate, so I'm going to reiterate that. So every successful SaaS applicant, special art services applicant, needs to really focus on quality program that's being offered up as part of the application, arts and cultural programming specifically, and how that programming is being earmarked and ingratiated and targeted for one or more of our defined communities. And this is the sort of short list of defined communities. Okay? And then finally, the third piece to every successful special art services application is, as an organization, how are you ingratiating yourself, making yourself known, and involving yourself with that targeted community that you're applying to get funding to serve through your program. So how's that program and the organization ingratiating themselves with that community? Okay. And again, just to reiterate that, so the print is a little smaller than my slideshow. The bullet list includes distinct cultural and ethnic communities, historically underserved communities of color, isolated geographic areas, or communities in isolated geographic areas, communities with high rates of poverty, people with disabilities, court-involved youth, LGBTQI communities, and homeless populations. Okay? And again, it's not an exhaustive list. There's other places in our guidelines where we talk about sort of the aging communities as well, the aged communities as well. So there's room for a number of different kinds of often underserved or not served at all communities to be served through a grant from us. Okay? But we really want to be specific. It can't just be in general terms. Strong applications will be very specific about what the community is, how it relates to the organization, and how the program is intersecting with your mission in order to serve those communities that you're articulating in your application. Okay. So that's there's more there, so more of the overview. Okay, we covered a lot of that here. Let's go back to that previous page. This is a very specific overview section for our 2 sponsored request categories that you're allowed to apply as a sponsored request. So there's definitely more specific, and this actually applies a lot to the sponsoring organization. And this is across any program now offering sponsorship. We provide more sort of specific sort of guidelines around how to work with a sponsoring organization and vice versa as a sponsoree. Okay. Generally funds for sponsor requests are up to $10,000, and of course there's still, in most cases, in fact all our categories, have a 50% match in the sponsor. So it'd be at least a $20,000 budget or more, so that's pretty substantial. Organizations may not impose fees submitting the sponsor application, but they can charge fees for administering the grant should you get a grant, and it's 7% of your award, up to 7%. So those are some of the parameters we laid out. And then there's a few other specific requirements that we want to be clear about. We'll move on to our categories, and then we'll talk a little more about those categories. Okay, general operating support. This is a kind of category that exists across virtually all of our programs, not all of them, but most of our program areas throughout New York State Council on the Arts. And it's really intended to be sort of for the most capacitated operational organizations that provide a mix of programs and services, usually one-on-one activity, that basically fit our mission in the SaaS program to about 90% of the total activity. So if you're serving if you're of the community, typically you're serving one or more of our defined communities by definition in terms of where you're located and the kinds of programs you're offering and where you're having the programs happen. And this is true of all GOS applicants, you have at least one full-time staff member. I'm sorry, it doesn't have to be full-time, but one paid staff member. Okay, payroll, not independent contractor. It's very specific. Then you start to meet the qualifications potentially of a general support request. Okay, and certainly if you've never applied to general support, we highly recommend that you call us and have a discussion to make sure it's a good fit as opposed to maybe project support. Okay. There are certainly more prerequisites that you want to be familiar with, but sort of I just wanted to highlight sort of the intent of the category at this juncture. The next category is literally called project support, and many of you, especially if you're a sponsored request, will probably fall into project support. And it's basically designed to provide high-quality arts and cultural programming, okay, to one or more of our defined communities. That's really how we work with the Special Art Services program, as opposed to one of our other discipline-specific programs. In our case, we will entertain single-discipline kinds of programming, like a theater season, right, or a dance season, or multidisciplinary, where it's sort of a variety of different arts disciplines that's curated in some way. And again, it's not a deal breaker to just have a laundry list of things, but the more intentful and intentional and curated and thoughtful the programming is, the more competitive it's going to be. Okay? And that sort of gets back to my first note about high quality programming that's in service or earmarked for one or more of our defined communities. Just a few highlights on this. And it says it right there after the bullets. Priority is given to organizations that pay fees to artists and curators and those that provide ongoing programming. Is that available elsewhere in the specific community? The more unique the programming is, the more sort of professionalized it is, the more competitive it's going to be in these categories. Also, I'm not, but where is it? You can point to it. What we don't fund, I'm not saying it's in here, single event activity we don't fund. So if it's a festival and that trips a lot of people, it needs to be at least 2 or more days of ongoing activities for those 2 days. Single one-off events, under no circumstances will qualify for a NISCA application in the SAS program. Okay, so again, it has to be some kind of thoughtful programming that's ongoing in some way. Thank you. There it is. All right. All right, let's see here. So right before in the category, each category will have similar sections to it, so sort of to digest, more easily digest the information. And let's go back to, before we go on to the next category, the last section here, which is prerequisites. Okay. So this is something to keep in mind in terms of making sure that you're a very good fit for the SAS program. And this is true of any of our programs. When you look at these guidelines, they've been structured, I think, more similarly, just for ease of the information sharing. So the prerequisites is certainly something you want to look at. Before we move on to the next category, so we'll do it in this order. I'm going to pause to ask to entertain questions before we get too far off. So if you have any questions on anything I've said up to now, especially for general support and project support, are there any questions? Yes, miss.
Does a project need to be in operation for any minimum amount?
Great question. Great question. I think I covered everything. And then, very quick. We typically almost never seed fund. We're not a first funder in these particular categories. So to your point, we typically expect that there be at least 1 year of programming that you're now speaking to as part of an application for future programming. Okay, so if it's a pilot year, we typically don't get, that's a very low priority. But once if it's a pilot year or a pilot program, you've never done it before, because remember you're applying a year out. So this year's application is a year out, and in the year out, you're basically saying, not even in this year, but in the coming year, we're going to do it for the first time. It's just a reality of being less competitive than other applicants who have ongoing programs that have a track record that they can speak to. And a lot of our support materials has to do with sort of, hey, give us examples of the programming you provided in the past. Okay, so we're typically not the first funder in for new programs.
In our case, we have a 3-month pilot, but we're really still within the month, so that would be interesting.
Well, we don't define how long the pilot has to be. So it would be sort of it'd behoove you to case make for you're ready to really, maybe it sounds like an application would include some expansion of the problem. then you have to case make for that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also a section for supplemental materials. So you want to make sure that you have some video imagery, some photographs, some sort of visual documentation of what happened. And, you know, that'll help fill out the application, right, and make it more competitive.
Yes, Miss.
So, would you fund a program where you started out as a collaborative, and now as a mission expansion, you're taking it to the next level, but you'd like to go on your own outside partners that you started the program with? So for the first few years, just to test how well the program would work, you were working with, collaborating with someone, and now you're ready to take the training wheels off. Would that qualify you?
Wow, that you'd have to case make that the elements are no longer with the next iteration are being accounted for in some way in terms of making sure the program will happen, the proposed program. Remember, you're requesting for activity to happen, right? In the future.
Correct.
So you're saying that the track record was embedded with a different configuration than what you're moving forward with in an application. That's what I'm hearing.
Okay, no, so it's just the next tier of the program. So we started out, we did the test we have a 5-year projection of the program. This is what we're going to start, this is how we're going to use it out.
Okay. And
So we're now going into year 3,
okay.
and we want to take the training wheels off and go our own because we tested it.
Sure. I mean, you know, your case maker. We have 3 years of pilot programming. We've gotten it this far. And then you have to case make us and the application year we seek funding to support this iteration that we're looking to develop it into moving forward. Yeah, that's pretty common.
Okay, great.
Certainly possible. So you have the point is you have a track record of several years of this programming that's been in development at this point. Sure.
So we're ready to grow.
And that's a good time to actually jump in for NISCA funds. Yeah, when you're ready to grow, that's a good kind of way of looking at it. So there's something there that you can point to as evidence of the programming achievements, and then how it's going to be expanded or in some way better fulfilled in its future iteration with the NISCA support. So now I'm kind of writing the application for you.
Thank you.
There's a hammer here. Yes.
Yes. I heard this is for the multi-year the program for the grants.
Okay, so
is that only for general operating support?
So let me talk. Multi-year is
Yeah.
not something that you as an applicant determine or have say in.
Okay.
So every request you make is for that coming year as a single year application. But in staff consultation with panel, we determine if the organization is viable for a multi-year designation for that grant.
Okay.
If it's general support, unless there's some real issue, we typically do at least 2 years. If by virtue of it being a general support request, should you get funding in general support. In project support, that varies. But you can get multi-year in project support as well. That is possible. Okay, but it's not something you ask for. There's nowhere in the application where you can say, I want to compete for multi-year. It doesn't work that way. There were years past where people could select if they wanted to be considered for multi-year, how much. But staff now does that in consultation with the panel.
So that's totally determined
By staff, yeah, and it'll be part of your award notification. So you'll know at the time of award, oh, I received the grant for the coming year,
okay.
plus multi-year.
Okay.
Into 2 or 3 years.
So the explanation will be there when
Should you get it?
awarded.
Yeah, but it's not something you request or apply for
Okay.
in any significant way.
Okay.
So that, yeah, if you're a sponsored request, there is no multi-year. Sponsored request must always come back every year.
Sponsored request.
There is no multi-year.
Okay.
And sponsored requests can only apply in our project support category and our instruction and training categories. Which we're going to talk about that next category next. So our next category is instruction and training. And I kind of hit some of the high marks here. A lot of this is sort of similar general information, but the key element here is the following ineligible for support. I'm going to start there with the no's and then get into the yes. single instructor programs, not something we're looking to get behind with an instruction and training category. Programs offered in cooperation with schools, school district, or BOCES, and offered during school hours or which take place immediately after school hours in school facilities. Part of that has to do with typically those kinds of programs tends to be sort of enrichment instruction and training or arts program, arts classes, and this is a very specialized category that I'll explain in a minute again. And then activities in the summer and during school vacations that are not an integral part of year-round instruction and training are also not eligible. So the idea of so let's move into what it does fund, the three threads. So within this special art services, here we go, yeah. Instruction and training is really designated for robust instructional activity that is either pre-professional development in nature, professional development in nature, or geared towards professional level traditional arts training, training in a traditional art form. Usually in that case, it's like a master-mentee kind of relationship. But those are the three threads. If it's strictly arts, arts training or arts education for enrichment purposes in an art form, that is not what this category is designed for. Okay? And it's not just for anyone. It's towards benefiting one or more of our specific defined communities. Okay, so now if for larger organizations that might offer this kind of professional level training, especially in that realm, to a general audiences, they can come in and apply directly to us, usually through the construct of scholarships, saying, hey, we're going to give so many scholarships to these one or more of our defined communities, and they sort of articulate that in the application. Okay. Yes, Miss, in the back.
Could you clarify around the mentoring part of developing expertise?
Sure. So with traditional arts, a lot of it is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, it's sort of you learn by following a master, an established master in that art form, and there's that kind of mentor-mentee relationship, as opposed to a class of like 10 dancers learning different maneuvers from a master dancer. So in the folk arts, it tends to be a little sort of more one-on-one, but not necessarily. I just use that as an example.
Yeah, what I want clarity on is whether or not what you fund the one-on-one or you fund the group session. That's what I need to know. So the funding is for that one-on-one training, to become an expert or to polish up your skills, or is it from a group perspective where there is an expert and they're teaching?
It can be either one. It could be either one. It just depends on the construct that you're prescribing to, and you would articulate that and sort of case make for why that makes sense for the particular art form in your application. So in that case, single instructor though, that's not what we're covering. It's just like one instructor doing it all. That's not what we're covering. So usually there's some kind of like variety of instructors that are part of the mix. Okay. All right. Questions here, and then I'll move my way back.
When you say program of short duration, so program, full day program for 2 weeks in the summer.
It's probably not. We're talking about robust, ongoing classwork and instructional work by doing for these specialized levels of pre-professional preparedness, professional preparedness, or high mastery of a folk art of some kind. Okay.
As far as like professional development goes, would that also have to be like successive classes? Or?
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
Or else it's not in this category.
Okay.
We don't do kind of seminar work.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. in the back.
Hi, I'm sorry. In
Okay.
terms of variety, so if, let's say I want to become I want to build capacity, and I need to know a little bit more about marketing, and then I also need some strategy and tactic. In those three categories, if I would get someone to instruct me one, then next, and then 3 different instructors, would that qualify, or that's still considered single?
Well, no, if it's 3 different experts with those 3 different areas. But what I would say is these are meant for art forms, not marketing or
No, I understand.
Okay. So it would be a question of like someone who's maybe, there's a jazz module, a ballet module, for someone who's sort of looking to be sort of an overall, let's say, musical theater dancer. and then it's different sort of instructors maybe for each of those 3 modules, 2 modules, right? That's possible.
Okay. No, I just wanted clarity in my mind.
No,
about
no.
my process. Thank you.
So, but everyone got that. But it's meant for art forms, not like marketing administration or something other than some kind of art form. Okay. Any other questions on our specialized project support instructional and training category for now? And we'll come back. All right. So, and then the last category is re-grants and partnerships. And again, I'm not going to belabor this one. This is an invitation-only category, and it's really a category that we use as a tool at New York State Council on the Arts to work with typically, larger service organizations, very capacitated larger service organizations, to do specialized programs at our behest in partnerships with us. We also run a number of our re-grant programs, okay, which include, we do have our signature re-grant program called, generically called the decentralization program. We have over 20 partners that between them serve all 62 counties, and they run basically mini-NISCA application opportunities on behalf of New York State Council on the Arts. So it's another way of accessing, especially for smaller organizations that might not compete very well directly to NISCA at the local level through their local arts council that's serving their county, access on NISCA funds. And it's not like NISCA money, it is NISCA money. So typically in a given year, an applicant can either come to us directly or go to their local re-grant site for the deck fund. Not both, it's one or the other. Just wanted to put that out there, probably a plug. So that's re-grants and partnerships, sort of in a very summary way. And then just to reiterate, for those of you that came a little later, the Special Arts Services Program, for example, is working with NIFA, your Foundation for the Arts here, to reestablish a technical assistance program to our SAS current SAS grantees that's currently in development. So we're really excited to roll that out later this year by way of our partner at your Foundation for the Arts. Okay, just another photo.
Would you like to see the questions?
So yeah, we're going to go to the next section. So the other thing that I wanted to do at this point in terms of introducing to the actual document, you saw that it had like general criteria in NISCA-wide. It had sort of the general sort of synopsis and summary of the program. And then it got into sort of the requirements and prerequisites of each category. And then it kind of repeats again with the questions that are actually asked. So the first part of the questions are what we are called standard questions, which are questions that are germane to any category you apply. Now, if you're being sponsored, you will have to answer these questions to provide them to your fiscal sponsor, who will then fill them out in the grant portal. And so you will work with your fiscal sponsor to answer these standard questions. Okay? Typically, a capacitated fiscal sponsor will have like a checklist of information they need from you that you just fill out that checklist document and provide back to them. Okay? And then as you scroll down, it'll get into the specific questions asked for each category. Okay, so we started, once again, it kind of repeats general operating support, right? So we saw that when we described the category. Now we're seeing general operating in terms of the questions being asked. And as you can see, they're couched as artistic programmatic, managerial fiscal, and then later on service to the field to give you a sense of what one of the 3 criteria is those questions are seeking to get a response for. Okay. But just keep in mind that for each one of these narrative questions, it's a 2,000 character limit. That's the same for each question. And that includes spaces, special characters, and carriage returns. Okay, that's about 3/4 of a single space page. But there are a lot of questions. So something that I like to tell applicants in terms of how to think about filling out one of our applications, regardless of category really, is even though it's discrete questions, think of it in terms of it being read as a long-form essay that's being weaved together by your response to each of the questions from one to the other. So sometimes that's one way to help you sort of decide how to get all the information in. When you're like, oh, I can't all fit it in that one, but maybe you can spread it out between the questions to sort of make your case and tell your story. That's basically what you're doing in each instance. Now, general support being the most unrestricted category really looks at the organization's fiscal, managerial, programmatic, and service to the field holistically, so it has the most questions. It really gets into a lot of nitty-gritty in terms of the operational ends of things along with the programming ends of things. So, and we did reduce it from the past, but we still have it down with 14 questions, right? And then you get into project support, and these are the questions there. And in project support, unlike general support, you're going to be more specific, and the questions are more around the particular programming that you're going to apply for consideration. Okay. So now it's always important to provide some context, especially in project support, some organizational context. But you really want to quickly spend most of your time case making for, first of all, articulating the program that you're seeking funds for specifically, as opposed to other things you might do as an organization. And case making for that, why that program is a good fit for this special arts services category. Okay, and how do we do it? By how it's serving one or more of our defined communities, by articulating which communities they are, and why, and how it fits into your mission, right? High quality programming, what's good about it and unique about it, how it's serving one or more of our defined communities, and then ultimately how you as an organization are ingratiating yourself into that community in order to ensure that they know that this program is available for them. It's for them, it's available for them. Okay. And again, the specific questions, there's a header for each question with a summary sort of program summary, changes, developments, and then underneath each question, there's an interpretive sort of explanation as to what kind of information we're looking from you in that question response. Okay, and that's the same pattern for all of them. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so we're going to move on to instruction and training, also very similar. This one has specific questions around the training program and the coursework that's being, sort of requesting the layout of the coursework that's part of the proposed program. So it has more specialty questions. It has less questions, but they're more specialized because it's a very specialized category. Okay, so let's move on. And that's only six. And then regrants and partnerships has a similar sort of as it relates to the regrants. And the other difference is this is in partnership with NISCA. We work together on the application that they submit, but they still get reviewed. It's not a giving. So even a partnership by invitation, regrants and partnership category gets reviewed through the panel process to ensure that it makes sense that these funds are being justly utilized as intended in terms of serving the program's mission in this case. And then the next section, it kind of repeats again with the categories, is the supplemental materials. Okay, now, if you are a sponsored request, all those questions are going to be filled out by you, the sponsored entity or group, through a sponsored request form. Okay, which you then, after you fill it out and complete it, it's a fillable PDF, and it mimics all the questions you just saw that otherwise, if you were a direct applicant, are on the website directly. But as a sponsored request, you will do it on a form so that it's easier for our sponsors to just upload that instead of like retyping it. Okay. Plus, you did it, and it removes at least one level of human error. So we're trying to get there. We're trying to get there with seamless. We're almost there. Again, in our homepage, there's a link to the sponsored request form. It's a fillable PDF. When you open it, it'll have all the categories as part of this multi-page document. You just fill in the budget pages that apply to you in the top, that applies to everyone. And then you go to your particular category and just fill in the questions for your one category. Don't try to break it up or reduce the pages to just what you're applying for. Just resave that form, and once it's been filled out, you provide that to your fiscal sponsor, along with the additional support materials that vary from category to category. So you want to be clear. Don't give us what we don't ask for. Okay? But do give us what we do ask for. And it does vary by category. And this is the section here where we start again with the general support category, but now we're looking at, what we want from you for each category. And there's for general support, there's 5 items. So there's 5 items, right? And one of them is optional. And then we have criteria for each of the other categories. I'm not going to get into it. They're there available to you. But if you have questions, I'll open up to it in any moment and we can certainly ask. Project support. So project support, if you notice, has 1, 2, 3 uploads. And the way they work is each listed support material, think of it in terms of the mechanics, how you would either provide it directly as an application or to your fiscal sponsor. Each lined out item is one upload box. So for example, if you're going to provide resumes of 5 key members of your organization or your team, right? You would create a single multi-page document that includes all 5 resumes, and then that document with all the resumes is the one upload that gets submitted as one of the support materials, right? Everyone gets that construct? So either you do it yourself, or when you're providing it to your fiscal sponsor, that's how you provide it too. You don't give them 5 different resumes, because there's only one upload box for resumes. You put them all together as a single document, a single multi-page document. And that's true for all our uploads. And that's just the mechanics of how to put the material together. Number 2, this is project support. I'm going to key in more on this because this seems more germane to our audience. Images or 3-minute videos. You would do it in a page or a multi-page document. Would you include that? Excuse me. For video, you don't provide the video file. You provide a link. So you need to keep the video somewhere, either on YouTube, Vimeo, on your own website, and you provide the link in that same page where you might have the pictures as well, the images. So that's how you provide that kind of material to us. And then number 3, since project support entertains a variety of different kinds of programmatic activity, you want to key in what you provide in that 3rd support material to what's germane to your particular request, right? Workshops, public programs, services to the field, other exhibitions, catalog, publications. So depending on what it is you're sort of proposing for project support, you want those materials to line up. All right, keep scrolling. And then the same for instruction and training. The big one that's very specific to this, if you're articulating the instruction and training support around scholarships, we definitely want to see, if applicable, that number 5. List of scholarship students for current year, noting whether full time. Also indicate the number of years you've been offering scholarships, so on and so forth. Okay, that's very specific to this category. Okay. Now let's go back to our home page, and we'll go to the sponsor request form. Any questions? Well, so she's going to go there. Any questions for what I've covered so far? Yes?
Yeah, so the project support category, as far as the materials go, you said you can upload 5 pictures, right? 5 images?
Right, so you want to create it in one single multi-page PDF,
right,
where you list out the 5 images, you provide some context, so you create that document.
That was my question, is how much context do you need? Do you just need a caption, or can we put like a description of what the image is, or?
We don't define that.
Okay,
whatever
so
you feel is necessary to give us the context, the proper context.
I mean, if it's a class, I would actually appreciate seeing if it's 10 classes in a series, which class this is, if this is the first class, 3rd class, etc.
Right.
What's
Especially
the age
video.
group that you're working with?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So it can be either a caption or like a whole description. Like it's not just like, here's the event, like what it was.
Oh no, not
what's
necessarily.
going on.
Anything that will provide the proper context. Usually up to like a short paragraph is fine.
Well, okay. All right. Cool.
In the back.
The same exact category, number 2, it says up to 5 images, a 3-minute video, or a website reference. So you couldn't create a document that had 5 images and a link to a video and a link to a website. You want one or the other or the other.
We want one. You can provide the images and one of the 2 links. We're trying to isolate the 2 links.
Okay.
So, because some folks don't have video content, but they have a website.
Yeah.
So, but we don't really have the time to do both. Good point on that. What we're trying to isolate is up to 5. If you don't have images, that's fine. I can just do the links.
Mhm.
So, but we're looking to entertain one link or the other.
Yeah, and with the website specifically, we would like to see the reference. We'd like to see a very specific area of the website so that we're not navigating throughout the website for 5, 6
Right,
minutes.
maybe it's a link to a page.
Yeah,
Right.
that might have a video embedded in it that maybe you couldn't
right.
pick up and put
maybe
inside
the
that.
description,
And you could
link saying exactly,
exactly.
Yes.
why you're going to that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good point. Any other questions? Okay. So by way of full disclosure, here's the sponsored request form, the fillable PDF form, and let's just let's go back to our home. You don't have to click on it or anything. You don't need to. Let's go back to our program homepage so people can see where the link is.